15a, and the discussion that our Gemara has been dealing with is sort of a continuation of the previous Mishnah and Gemara on page 14. On 14a, the Mishnah there talked about an argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir about using boards for schach. And now on page 15a, the Mishnah talks about using your roof, which is basically boards for schach. And the Mishnah on 14 had an argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. And the Mishnah here also has an argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. And soon in the Gemara, we'll see that the Gemara is going to be bothered with, it sounds like it's the same argument even. Why is the Mishnah repeating itself? This is the case might be a little different, but the law is the same. And as long as you know how to apply the law, you would basically know what to do in this scenario based on page 14a. Why do we need the Mishnah to repeat itself on 15? And the reason the Gemara doesn't ask that question right away is because the Mishnah on page 15a, it is a little confusing with the different names. It has Reb Yehuda, Reb Meir, but it also mentions Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And because of this, in addition to also what Beis Shammai says, which is also a little unclear, because of this, the Gemara cannot right away ask, well, this is the same exact thing as page 14a. The Gemara first has to explain and give an understanding of the wording of the Gemara needs to first give clarity to what the Mishnah on page 15a is saying, and only then can it say, oh, if that's all it's saying, it's actually the same thing that we had on page 14a. And if that's so, why is it repeating itself? So what we've been doing until now in the last 2 days is we've been talking about how to explain just the simple meaning of the Mishnah. The laws don't seem to be understood. We've got Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Reb Meir, these three opinions. And is Reb Meir saying something different than Beis Shammai, or is he saying the same thing as Beis Shammai, which is what the Gemara seems to conclude, that he's basically saying the same thing as Beis Shammai? And then, of course, we're trying to understand what's the logic of the Mishnah, which boils down to a question of, when you say that you cannot use boards for schach, there are two ways of understanding the problem. Why can't you use boards for schach? One understanding of it is, well, if you are talking about a house that has boards as the roof, then the problem of the boards is that they were put on for the purpose of dwelling, not for the purpose of a hut, shade. Sukkah needs to be a sukkah. It needs to be shade. That has to be its purpose. You built it as a hut. You build it as a house with boards. The problem is that this is built as a house, not as a hut. It's called Tasev Leimin Ha'asa. You built it wrong. You built it with the wrong intent. And it's now there as a house, and now you want to switch it over and kosher it. You can't just kosher it. You got to rebuild it somehow, which is something that we'll have to see, and something that we saw in the Mishnah, different ways of rebuilding it. But that was the first issue that could Rabbi, be the Mishnah's issue. Yes, Victor.
Question is, so at times the Gemara, this is obviously the ways they built houses, but what was the way before this for a regular sukkah? Before this was a normal, construction house thing, when would this have come in the times of the Gemara, or this has always been like this from day one?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, because they're saying it's too much like a house. Now, they
Mhm,
didn't always have houses like we, like even in the times of the Gemara houses. I'm sure that before that maybe the houses were, the construction was different. So
mhm.
at some point, is it because of the construction of houses and they said the tikra is too similar to a house? They made a
Yeah,
gezerah, or
exactly. In other
there's
words, in the time of Noah, where they, uh, or maybe before his time, I guess. No, let's say before the time of Noach, where they didn't even, we know from Noach that they built with wood. They built an ark. He built his ark, and we know he made different clay machresha. He had, he was an inventor, and he invented all different types of instruments that they could use to make things easier. Noach is because he made things easier for people to live. He made it easier because he invented these different instruments and machinery. Now, before that, they probably would never have made a decree of a house. Let's say, Adam Arishan's time, or in his grandchildren's time, Shase and Cain and Hevel, and all these other. In those days, they would never have made such a decree because they didn't build houses like that. So if you used a piece of wood that was basically from a tree, and it was just maybe it was shaved off a little, uh, but not really, not maybe made into more of a block. So they would not have made such a decree about you can't use that for schach because people build houses that way. They didn't build houses that way. But the rabbis in their day, when people did build houses that day, and I would say it went back probably even before the times of the Gemara, because we know from Noach that there was already he built a teva, an ark, and he even had the ma'aziva on it. He had tar, right? It uses this term that kaifer. He used the uh, that how he built it. So it sounds like they probably were a little more advanced than we imagine. You know, we think of everyone living in these little huts, but the truth is they did know how to build. They, they think of a Noah's Ark. So yeah, but if there was no such thing, then they would never have made such a decree. To the extent that the rabbis, the commentaries want to say that what is the case that we're talking about here? The case must be a um, a case where your boards are 4 handbreadths. And the reason is because the fact that the rabbis made the decree about 4 handbreadths, it must be that that was the norm of how to build houses. In other words, so the commentaries understand that this is a proof of how they had to build, because that's why they would make such a decree. And to the extent that Reb Meir, who says I'm even careful not to use 3 handbreadth boards, according to the way Shmuel explains Reb Meir's opinion that it's even on 3 handbreadth boards. The way they explain Reb Meir is that there were some individuals, a minority of people, that probably built their houses with smaller boards. Maybe they were poorer, or for some reason, for whatever reason, they used these smaller boards. Reb Meir, who normally is very concerned even about minorities, he will say even that scenario he's going to prohibit for a sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda would argue and say, I'm not worried about minority people, I'm worried about majority of the people. And if this is what majority of the people use 4 handbreadth, that's what I'm concerned about, at least according to the way Shmuel explained the Mishnah on the Mishnah of page 14a. But so what we're seeing is that this must be the way they built houses. Okay, so getting back to what we were just discussing and basically reviewing from the past 2 days. So we said that our Mishnah that talks about this tikra, this roof, that you want to now use as your sukkah. You basically have this room, maybe like a porch or something that you're going to now transform and you want to use as your sukkah. And the Mishnah has a few options of how to do it and different opinions of which options are doable, are acceptable according to halacha. So this scenario, what's the problem? What would be the problem in the first place? You have a room with wood on top. What's the big deal? There's no maziva, which is there's no type of plaster on top, or maybe some type of clay or mud, or maybe even tar. You don't have any of that. It's just just pieces of wood. And so what's the problem with using this as your sukkah? So the first thing that I just mentioned was that the problem is that you built it as a house and not as a sukkah. The second issue with this is that it doesn't matter how you built it. The fact is you're using boards that are similar to a house. Now, when you use boards that are similar to a house, what's the problem with that? So the problem is explained by the commentaries of the Gemara, which means the Rishonim, the commentaries, the early commentaries. It's explained in different ways. One explanation is that the person who's building it, he is going to make a mistake and say, oh, the fact that I'm using boards for a sukkah means that I could probably sit in my house and use my house as a sukkah. So it's about the person himself. Another way of other Rishonim, Ritva, says a slightly different. He says it's about what people are going to see. The people outside, the people will see that you use boards. They're going to say, oh, what's the difference between boards and and my house? In my house, why can't I use my house? So again, there are two issues that we're dealing with. One issue is the fact that it was built as a house. Another issue is the fact that you're using boards that are similar to a house. Now, the issue of the fact that it was built like a house is a biblical problem. The issue that it's similar to boards, that's a rabbinic decree. And not everyone agrees with that. We had in the Mishnah on page 14a that it could be that that's subject to a debate. Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, there were different ways of explaining Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, but according to one way is that Reb Yehuda doesn't even buy into this decree in the first place. Another way is that he buys into it only for the size of 4 handbreadths. So there were two ways of explaining that Mishnah on page 14a, and now we're on page 15a, and on page 15a we're dealing with the fact that you built a house and you have this room that you want to use as your sukkah, and it has a roof, and the roof is made out of these boards. So what's the story? How do you fix this problem? And the question is, which problem? The problem of the fact that it was built as a house, or the fact that you're having boards? Both they're two separate problems, very similar, because they both tie into each other. The fact that it was built as a house, and the fact that it's boards that is similar to a house, and we're afraid you're going to end up using what was built as a house. So it's the biblical problem and the rabbinic decree that we're afraid is going to come out that you'll end up using and falling into that biblical problem. So there are two options here, and possibly this is the argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, because the way of, based on the way we understood the previous Mishnah, the laws will have to apply them to this Mishnah as well. So let's just go over the way the Gemara, what the Gemara went, the path the Gemara took. The first thing the Gemara said is, what's Beis Hillel's reason that you could either just remove these boards, either take off the nails or pick them up, separate them, these boards that are using as the roof, and then wave them or shake them around and then put them back down, or just remove every other one? What's the reason Beis Hillel allows that and says it's going to be kosher? So the Gemara says, well, the problem was you built it wrong. You built it like a house. So if you do any of these things, what you're really doing is rebuilding it. And if you rebuild it, it's kosher, as long as you're not just like koshering it, like saying, oh, now I'm using it as a sukkah, as long as you're doing an actual rebuilding. And what's a rebuilding? So these are the two options that the Mishnah, Beis Hillel, in the Mishnah says that you're mafakfek, which would mean separate the roof, the schach that was initially a roof, you separate it and just put it back down. And that would be an act that's going to show or that you're rebuilding the sukkah in a way that it's for sukkahs, it's for schach, for a hut purpose, for a purpose of shade. You're building it properly. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be for the mitzvah. It has to be for shade. And now that you removed it and put it back down, that's good enough. That's mefakfek. Or the other option was noitel achas mibenatayim, which is that you remove every other board and you put in its place kosher schach. And again, that would also be a way to rebuild, that you're rebuilding it as a sukkah, and the purpose would be for shade. Yes, David.
The word mefakfek is like one of these words that sounds like it's an ongoing thing. It happens over and over and over again. So how does that fit with the fact that he's moving it? Is he moving it over and over again? It's like an ongoing thing.
So I'm not sure exactly where you see that in the grammar of the word mefakfek or the etymology of mefakfek, but basically the commentaries seem to have two ways of translating mefakfek, which one of them is that you're removing the nails that were holding this roof onto your house, and the other way is Rashi's way, which is that you slicer, you break off the roof, and then your menanea, which means to wave it, similar to like the na'anuim, the same word is used when we shape the lulav. So this is the way Rashi translates mefakfek.
Because of the type of word it is, it's like megalgal. It's like one of these words that sounds like it's a repetitive kind of word.
Yeah. Interesting, but it doesn't mean that you have to, continuously remove it and put it back down. It's you do it and you put it back down, and it's going to be a kosher sukkah now.
Okay.
Yes.
This translation here is very simple. All they say is moves for mefakfek. They don't say anything. They just say moves.
Well, you have to understand that once you start getting into the commentaries and the different opinions, it develops into a whole, you could develop into whole differences in halacha and so on. So if they're translating it very simple,
my only point is move is a very vague word. It's well, what does that mean? Move. Technically everything's moving.
Right,
a tiny little bit. Nothing
exactly
is,
how much. Right. It doesn't clarify to what extent. Yeah. It makes it easier for the translator if they just translate it very vague. They don't have to, get involved in looking into it and see what it really means and how the commentaries really hold. Yes, Jeffrey.
It seems to me we have the same word. We use pakak, and it means the stopper on a bottle.
Right?
And so all you're doing is it's a closure. I think rather than the moving, it's a closure. And when I think about the houses, I think about not using nails, but that they have niches on the top, like of mud walls. And you make the niches such a way that you don't have to put the boards across the very top. You could put them just slightly below into the space that's wide enough to fit the boards. And when you read later on, we're going to read about, one of the rabbis had a grandchild, and he wanted to make sure the grandchild and the mother were in a sukkah. And so he's not pulling out nails. He's just taking the board and moving it up and down in the niche, or taking out a few of them, putting some straw up so that it'll be a kosher sukkah, and they don't have to move. So it's sort of like, we had a big example of a sakana situation. We have a example of an extreme situation, because these people are exempt from the sukkah, but he still wants to make it a sukkah. Okay, so it's very interesting, because examples that are given are on all the different angles, all the different extremes. But it's a simple process as far as it looks when he's saying that he's going to do this. He's not getting up on a ladder and pulling out nails and splintering wood.
Right. Well, we're going to see when we get up to that. But in the meantime, what I mentioned to you earlier is really what the commentaries talk about on this Gemara. The Rosh is this. The Rosh is the commentary. Who's the father of the Torah. Who, in fact, the Shulchan Aruch seems to mention about the nails, and in Shulchan Aruch in chapter. Let me tell you where it is. It's chapter 631. They actually talk about. I don't have the Shulchan Aruch in front of me, but I was looking at it. Yesterday, where it does mention. It seems to follow that again. This is going to be a halacha that's applicable if someone wants to use their house if they have a house with a. So it is a practical thing. What do you need to do? And Shulchan Aruch mentions about this option of mefakfek, and the question is, to what extent do you need to do that? Do you need to take out the nails? Do you need to wave it? Do you need to shake it? So again,
there's a much different. That's not a Mediterranean construction. Those people are not living in the same kind of place, and they're living many hundreds of years later.
The thing is that the Rush seems to be touching upon the fact that how he understands it to mean, and he's translating it as masmerim. He uses the word nails.
Correct.
Okay. In any event, but I think the main point here is what we're dealing with is how to first thing is how to translate the Mishnah and the opinions of the Mishnah. What are the differences between these opinions? How do you understand the flow of the Mishnah? David, did you want to say something? Yes.
Yeah, if you want, I can share. There's a piece here that has the Shulchan Aruch, what we're talking about.
Let's save it for after, because the Shulchan Aruch is going to base itself on the conclusion of this Gemara. And at the conclusion of the Gemara, a few things switch. So let's just wait for the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the flow of the Gemara and the way it's basically going to explain the opinions of the Mishnah, and this is what we did yesterday, was that the reason of Beis Hillel had to do with you got to rebuild the sukkah. How do you rebuild it? You either rebuild it by separating everything and then putting them back down, or you don't separate everything. You separate every other one, and then you put in its place kosher schach, and that's going to work. That you're going to be able to. You're going to be able to use this sukkah because it wasn't built in a way that's non-kosher. Again, initially it was built in a way that's not kosher, but you rebuilt it now. You put on kosher schach. Now you do have some non-kosher schach there, and that was of course a question of how do you deal with the non-kosher schach there. But the non-kosher schach are basically boards. But one way of learning it is it's not a problem, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because the boards that are there, the only issue is how they were built, not the fact that they're boards, because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree that there's even a decree that anything similar to a house is a problem. So if you learn that way, you don't have a problem. But what about if you learn the other way? And that is that because there are 4 handbreadths, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that there's a problem to have this non-kosher schach, which is these boards that are 4 handbreadths wide. How are you getting around that? And that question would be in Reb Meir as well, which is the way Reb Meir explains it, and that is that you remove every other one, which is basically the same option. He's just saying you have to use this option. So how would Reb Meir explain it? How does he get around that problem of the fact that these are boards, and boards you are not allowed to use as schach? You can't use these boards for schach. So the understanding that we're the way we're explaining it is that you're basically removing the middle boards of this sukkah, and the middle boards you're replacing with schach. And this way, the outer boards are just called a wall. They're not really boards. You're not sitting under them. You're not eating under them. And that would be just the simplest way of understanding the noitel achas beinatayim. Basically, what you accomplished here is that you're removing the middle board, and the two middle boards are going to be the size of a sukkah. And by removing the two middle boards, what you've done is you've rebuilt your sukkah by replacing the schach from boards to branches. And by doing that, you've rebuilt your sukkah. So those are the two options here. And the Gemara says, what is Beis Shammai really saying? That you need to do both. You need to remove them all, wave them all, and then put them down, and then remove every other one and put down kosher schach, or put down branches. Like, what do you gain by doing both? So the Gemara says, no, he doesn't mean you have to do both. What he really means is the same thing that Reb Meir says, is you can only do the second option. Option B, which is noitel achas, you take one in between and you remove it and put kosher schach. That's the only option. That's what Beis Shammai is saying. The Gemara, of course, asks, so then Beis Shammai and Reb Meir are saying the same thing. And the Gemara's answer is that, yeah, that you're right. Beis Shammai and Reb Meir are saying the same thing. And all that Reb Meir is doing is saying, yeah, Reb Yehuda, you hold that there's an argument here. I hold that this is not an argument. Everyone agrees. Even Beis Hillel agrees that this is the only option. So in other words, how many opinions are there about what to do in this scenario? You have this hut or this room that you're making into a sukkah. It was a house. It was part of your house. It's a porch or something, and you're making it into a sukkah. How many options are there? So, or how many opinions are there? Really, there are two. You either hold that you can do mefakfek or noitel achas, or the only option is noitel achas. That's really the two opinions here. And the question is, who holds what? But there's only two options. And one opinion says you have both options, and the other opinion says you can only use one of the options, only the noitel achas. You can only take the board in the middle and replace it with kosher schach. That would be the only option. That's basically the way the Gemara explained the Mishnah. And now we're ready for the next question of the Gemara, and that is, my komash malan. My komash malan must be about 18 lines from the top. And here is where the Gemara says, isn't this the same exact law that we learned on page 14a? This is the question that I initially was telling you the Gemara is going to be asking. The Gemara first had to clarify the opinions and explain what's going on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was not as clear as it could have been. And the Gemara went through a series of back and forth, the dialogue, to figure out the meaning of the Mishnah. Now we're ready to say, well, what comes out from all this is that we see there's an argument if there's a gzeiras tikra, if there's a decree about having boards that are similar to a roof, or there's no problem of having boards that are similar to a roof. That's basically what it boils down to. Rabbi Yehuda, in the opinion of Beis Hillel, says that I'm not worried about boards that are similar to a roof. I'm worried about boards that are built like a house. That's what I'm worried about. If you built it as a house and now you want to use it as a sukkah, that's a problem. But if you built it, but you use boards for your schach, that's no problem. I'm not worried about that. And Reb Meir says, yes, I'm worried. I make a gzeira. I believe there's a gzeira. There's a decree against using that. So that's really the same. Again, our Mishnah does pick a case, a different case, but you have to understand that as long as we would know this law from the previous Mishnah, we could apply it. We just need to apply it to this case. We don't need the Mishnah to come and tell us this. As long as we know the essence of the law from the previous Mishnah, there is it's not necessary to give me this case, and that we could just apply it ourselves. We also have the ability to use our heads and apply this law. We don't need the Mishnah to come and tell us this. So that's the Gemara's question here, and that's where we're holding. My komash malan. What is this coming and letting us hear? Again, must be about 18 lines from the top on page 15a. And the Gemara says, Reb Meir Islay Gzeras Tikra, are you coming to let me hear that Reb Meir holds of a decree against using boards because it's similar to a roof? Reb Yehuda less like Gzeras Tikra, and Reb Yehuda doesn't care about it being similar to a roof, and he doesn't make a decree against using boards. And he says you're allowed to use boards even though they are 4 handbreadths wide. Is that what you're coming to let me to let me know? That's what this Mishnah is going out of its way to let me know on page 15a. There was already an argument once before about this. It was actually on the previous page, Ditnan, that we learned in the Mishnah, on the previous page, 14a, Mesachachin ben Asarim. You can use boards for schach. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Meir says you can't. He prohibits it. So we basically know this law, and all you need to do is apply it to this other case where you built your house, and now you want to fix it. You want to use one of the rooms for your sukkah. So can you use the boards? According to Reb Meir, no, you can't use boards. You took them off and put them back on. Okay, shkoyach, you took them off, put them, you rebuilt it. So that's nice that you built it now as a sukkah and you're rebuilding it. That's good. But the fact is, you can't use boards according to Reb Meir. Reb Yehuda says you could. So of course, Reb Yehuda is going to give you the option of taking it apart and putting it back together for a sukkah. That's of course fine according to Reb Yehuda. Reb Meir is going to say you can't do that. So why do we need to hear this again? So the Gemara says, Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan. Reb Chia bar Abba says in the name of Reb Yochanan that Reisha ben Asarim Meshupin Askina. The beginning Mishnah, the Gemara now comes and tries to give us it tries to explain it that really they're separate cases. This is not the conclusion of the Gemara. This is a thought that the Gemara has, that let's try to give let's try to figure out a way to differentiate between the previous Mishnah on 14a and the Mishnah here on page 15a. And we'll say that the Mishnah on page 14a was really talking about boards that you smoothened out. You, what would be
you planed it down.
Planed them down. Okay, you planed them down, and it's called meshupin. You smooth them and plane them, and what the problem with that is that when you do that, you're getting it ready, you're preparing it similar to a vessel, because when you work on this wood, it's basically very similar to making a vessel and building a vessel. And by doing that, the rabbis would have been concerned, or they could have been concerned, I should say, that if you can use a board that's planed down, then you might end up using a vessel for stuff that's made out of wood. And we know that you're not allowed to use anything that's makabel tumah. That's a receptacle that could receive tumah, impurity, and any vessel is capable of receiving tumah. That would not be usable. Again, the schach is meant to be raw material. It's not meant to be a built-up vessel, something made into a vessel. It's supposed to be raw. And here, okay, so you planed it down. Really, that should be kosher for schach. However, the Gemara is explaining that the Mishnah on page 14a maybe is the case of over there is that Reb Meir might say over there that you made it very similar to a vessel. We're going to say that you're not allowed to use that for schach. If you just took a board from a branch from your tree, even if you sort of like cut it down a little, it's okay. But if you planed it and made it smoothened, you made it really like a smooth piece, that's a problem. That's what Reb Meir would hold. And that maybe is what his opinion is on page 14a. Again, the Gemara is giving like an option that maybe this is the meaning and this is how you differentiate it, because on page 14a, we'll say that that's talking about a case where you have these boards that are so smooth that it's very similar to a vessel. And so the Mishnah says, Reb Yehuda says, no problem. I don't make a decree against the type of things that are similar to vessels. And Reb Meir is going to say that it is a problem. So maybe that's the meaning there. And here we're talking about a different type of issue, and that is that you're using planks of wood that are similar size to a house, to a roof. So there we're talking about something similar to a vessel. Here we're talking about something similar to a roof, and that would be a way of differentiating. Let's read it inside. So Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan. Reb Chia bar Abba says in the name of Reb Yochanan, Reisha, the first Mishnah, is talking about one case, Nasarim Meshupin. We're talking about these boards that are planed. Askinan, we're talking about. Mishum Gzeres Kalim Nagaban. They made it was about the Gzera, the decree about vessels. That's why they dealt with that on page 14a, and they made a Mishnah out of it to deal with that issue. Ula Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Oh, so now the Gemara says, however, I don't know if you could explain it that way. Ula Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. According to Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, which is a statement that we learned earlier, the Amar that says, if you use schach and you use these arrows, and an arrow is made up of two parts. There's the pole part, and then there's the actual arrow part. And the pole part, the pole part, and a simple case would be the pole is like the male, and the arrow part, the end piece, the piece at the end would be like the female part, and it would receive the pole. So if you have it that way, so the pole is called the zachar, the male, and it fits into the arrow at the end. And obviously, we're talking about that they both must be made out of wood, I guess, because that's you're using them for schach. So the thing is that which one can you use for schach? What can't you? So it says if you use these arrows for schach, zacharim is kshera. If you use the male part, it's kosher because it's not a receptacle. It protrudes. B'nekevais, the female part, which let's just say let's say a simple case would be that the arrow end, the end of it, is like a receptacle to hold the pole. So in that case, of course, it could be both ways, but let's just say that example where the arrow part is like a receptacle. So that's called the nekeva, the female, and that is a vessel. It's a receptacle, and the law would be psula. You can't use those for schach. Now the Gemara has an interesting point here. It says v'loy gazar zacharim atu nekevos. They didn't have any problem with something very similar to a receptacle, and that fact that you're going to use it for schach. They didn't say, well, this male is very similar to the female one, because it theoretically could have been a female piece, that pole that would receive a male arrow, so to speak. So why don't we make a decree over there? So if we don't make a decree over there, why over here would we say that there's a decree when you have a plain piece of wood that we're afraid it's very similar to a receptacle in a vessel? That the other case is even much more similar, because you have poles that are female or male. You could have it either way, and it would be very similar to a vessel. And if we allow you to use the male, you're going to end up, there's going to be mistakes made, and people are going to think that you're allowed to use these arrows for schach. So the Gemara says, if we don't make a decree there, well, how could we make a decree here? Ella, the Gemara says, rather, and whenever the Gemara says Ella, it almost always means it's retracting. It says, Al Karachach, it must be Reisha, Pligi, Bigzeras Tikra, the Seifa, Pligi, Bigzeras Tikra. Rather, let's go back to our original thought. The first Mishnah was talking where they're arguing over there. Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda have an argument. And their argument is about if there's a decree regarding boards that are very similar to a roof, tikra, a roof. In our Mishnah on page 15 is also, they're arguing about a decree that boards are similar to a roof. And it really is the same, it seems like the same thing. V'eflugi betarti zimni lamali. So why do they argue twice? Seifa Reb Yehuda. The end Mishnah, which means the one on page 15, is Reb Yehuda is answering back. It's like a continuation of the previous Mishnah. And it's the way he's talking, trying to convince his contemporary about, you really should agree with me. And the other rabbi is, no, you should, so they're basically continuing their debate. Reb Yehuda, the Ka'amar, it's Seifa Reb Yehuda. Seifa, the end, is Reb Yehuda talking. The Ka'amar Leila Reb Meir, that he went and said back to Reb Meir, Amai ka asarta ben asarim. Why are you prohibiting boards? Mishum gezeras tikra, because you hold that there's a decree about having boards. Hi svara, this thought, this opinion, is this way of understanding, meaning that you should make a decree. That's lebeis Shammai who de islahu. That's Beis Shammai who holds of that. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Ubeis Hillel like Gazri. And Beis Hillel doesn't hold of that. So what Reb Yehuda is really doing here in the Mishnah is trying to remind Reb Meir that there is such an opinion. So what you're saying is not totally wrong, but that's the opinion of Beis Shammai. We don't hold of that. So that's where Reb Yehuda is arguing back, and that's why the Mishnah starts off. Reb Yehuda says, Beis Shammai says you need to be mefakfek v'noitel achas mefakfek or noitel achas mebeinatayim. But Beis Hillel says you could do. I'm sorry, Beis Shammai says that mefakfek isn't good enough, and you need to do noitel achas mebeinatayim. But Beis Hillel says you can do either one because we don't hold of this gzeras tikra. I was just inserting in the Mishnah the conclusion of the earlier Gemara. So basically, what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that Reb Meir, you hold that there's a gzeras tikra. That's not true. There is no gzeras tikra. That was Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai is the one who says that mefakfek doesn't work, and you need to do the noitel achas. You need to remove every other board and put in kosher schach. Beis Hillel says you could just separate the boards and put them back down. You're allowed to use boards for schach. Mefakfek is good, and that's what Reb Yehuda is arguing back to Reb Meir. That if you remember, this is an argument Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. And what does Reb Meir answer back? V'amar le Reb Meir, and Reb Meir says back to him, Lo nechlaku Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel do not argue about this matter. So here we have an understanding of why there are two Mishnahs. The second Mishnah is really a continuation. They are arguing about the same debate, but it is taking it a step further, and it's Reb Yehuda is getting into how do you fix this problem? And that's where you have Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which basically sheds light on the actual initial argument. And we see that it's Beis Shammai who's the author of this opinion. And Reb Meir says, no, everyone agrees. Even Beis Hillel agrees to me. So they're basically arguing about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel from who were earlier rabbis. What did they really hold? And so we have the argument of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda discussing the opinions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And basically, Reb Yehuda thinks that it's a debate, and he's holding like Beis Hillel. And Reb Meir says it's not even a debate. Everyone agrees with me. Now, this all sounds great, except for one big problem. And the big problem is that the previous Gemara, we did discuss an argument between Rav and Shmuel how to explain the Mishnah. And Rav's opinion was very simple, relatively simple. Rav's way of explaining the Mishnah was that, Reb Yehuda, who allows you to have boards, he doesn't care how big your boards are. You can use any boards. There's no decree ever. So we've got a polarized argument here between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Reb Meir says you cannot use boards, and Reb Yehuda says you can use boards and any boards. And it's there's no limits. And the way we've explained it is basically, do we make a decree or we don't make a decree? But there was another way of explaining the Mishnah. And the other way of explaining the Mishnah was Shmuel. And Shmuel said that everyone holds of a decree about boards. There's a Gzeras Tikra. Only question is, when does the Gzera, when does this decree kick in? According to Reb Meir, it kicks in at 3 handbreadths. And according to Reb Yehuda, the decree kicks in at 4 handbreadths. And we've explained why that is, because Reb Meir is always worried about, even if it's only a minority, people use 3 handbreadth boards, which is basically like 9 inches. Even the minority of people that they're also going to make a mistake. We have to be concerned to make a decree about them. And Reb Yehuda is not so concerned about a minority of people. And therefore, Reb Yehuda is going to say that the decree will kick in when the boards are 4 handbreadths, when they're about 12 inches. And anything less than that, there's no decree. But even Reb Yehuda agrees of this decree that we are concerned that your boards are very similar to a roof. Now, if you take that new information that Shmuel, the way Shmuel is explaining this, that even Reb Yehuda is concerned about boards, that you can't use them for schach because there's a decree. Now look back in our Mishnah. What does Reb Yehuda say? Guess what? All you got to do is remove the boards and plop them back on. How could that work? These are boards that are 4 handbreadths wide. Everyone agrees that these are prohibited. Reb Meir, of course, he holds even if they're 3 handbreadths. He holds even if they're 3 handbreadths wide, there would be a problem with boards. And Reb Meir, figures out a solution to the problem. It's called noitel achas mi beinatayim, that you remove some of the boards and you put kosher schach there. So Reb Meir's opinion is not a problem. It's really Reb Yehuda's opinion, according to Shmuel's way of explaining it, that Reb Yehuda is also concerned about using 4 handbreadth boards. So what do you do if you have your porch with 4 handbreadth boards? And Reb Yehuda is saying in the Mishnah, you know what you can do? Mefakvei, take them apart, put them back down. How in the world can you put back down this non-kosher schach? They're called boards that are 4 handbreadths. And you're just going to allow it to be put back down, and that's going to be kosher schach? So how can we explain the Mishnah the way Shmuel explains this argument? It seems very shocking. You're going to be mefakved. You just take it apart and put it back down. You just told me you can't build a sukkah that way. Oh, you built a house that way, and now you're going to put it back down. It's going to be kosher. You can just put boards. So the Gemara says that I'm going to read it inside. We're about 15 lines from the bottom of the page. Hanicha, this is good, l'Rav, according to Rav, the Amar Machlekes b'Shiesh ben Arba, that explains that the argument between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda is that even on boards that are 4 handbreadths wide, the Reb Meir is like Zeres Tikra, that Reb Meir holds there's a decree against using boards. Reb Yehuda less like Zeres Tikra. Reb Yehuda doesn't hold of such a decree. And therefore, Reb Yehuda says there's no problem with using boards for schach as long as you built it properly. And if you didn't build your sukkah properly, you built it as a house, all you got to do is separate it and then drop them back down, put them back down, and you can use them because they're kosher for schach as long as you build it properly. And so all you got to do is remove it and then put it back down. That fits very well with everything that we've explained until now. However, Elul Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, the Amar that says that the argument between Rav and Shmuel, between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, is that when a board is between 3 and 4 handbreadths, if it doesn't have 4 handbreadths, that's where there's an argument Rabbi Yehuda says I don't have to worry about the minority of people that use that also use 3 handbreadth boards for their roofs, and they're going to make a comparison between their 3 handbreadth boards of a sukkah and 4 handbreadth boards of a house. That those type of people I'm not worried about. So I don't make a decree when it's 3 handbreadths between 3 and 4. But once the boards are 4 handbreadths, everyone agrees. But when there are 4 handbreadths of the boards are 4 handbreadths wide, divrei hakol psula, everyone agrees that it's invalid. So in that scenario, seifa b'may pligi. What is the argument over here in this seifa, which is the way the Gemara is referring to our Mishnah, which is calling the Mishnah on page 14, the Reisha, the first part of the Mishnah, and the conclusion of the Mishnah, called the seifa, the end part of the Mishnah, is the Mishnah that we learned here on page 15. And the problem the Gemara has is that our Mishnah says that Rabbi Yehuda holds you can just drop that back down, these boards, and use them for schach. And the question is, well, you can just use them for schach. These are 4 handbreadth boards that we hold are puzzle. 4 handbreadth boards are invalid. The way Shmuel explains the Mishnah on page 14a is that even Rabbi Yehuda, everyone holds that these are puzzle schach. These are invalid schach. You can, and now what happened? You built it in your house. You built your room of your house. And now what are you going to do? Lift them up and drop them back down. Oh, a kosher sukkah. A kosher sukkah? What do you mean? You have these boards. They're very similar to a roof. And boards that are very similar to a roof have a xeris tikra, according to everyone, the way Shmuel sees things. So the Gemara says, Seifa. The Gemara says, Seifa b'may pligi. So what are they arguing about in the Seifa? Everyone should agree that you only have one option. Why does Rabbi Yehuda give you the option of mefakfek, that you to put them, remove them and put them back down? So the answer is the bitule tikra kamifligi. The answer is that Shmuel will tell you the end. This Mishnah on page 15a. It's talking a little different, somewhat different than the Mishnah on 14a. The Mishnah on 14a was talking about using the boards in the first place. Can you use boards for schach? Now, the Mishnah talks about what do you need to do to remove the problem of something that's a board? How do you get rid of the problem of a board? Bitule tikra. How are you mevatel? How can you nullify the problem of something being similar to your roof? What does this mean? What we see here is something that you almost never see in the whole Shas. What we're going to see here is that the rabbis made a decree, and they're very concerned that you are going to make a mistake and use your house for a sukkah because you saw people using boards for schach. So you're going to say, well, why can't, or you yourself use boards for schach? You're going to say, well, why can't I just use my my porch that has boards on it? And you're going to want to use that for your sukkah. And the rabbis made a decree, you can never use boards. But guess what? If you show us that you're not going to make such a mistake, we're going to allow you to use boards. I don't know where else you can find this. It's a really unique case. Normally, when the rabbis made a decree, they made the decree. It doesn't matter. You're going to make a mistake. You're not, they made absolute decrees. Here, our Mishnah on page 15a, the way Shmuel is explaining it is that we have a scenario here where the rabbis are going to let go of their decree. And they're going to tell you, you know what? You've proven to us that you're not going to make such a mistake. We're going to allow you to use these boards. Initially, we said that sukkah is not even kosher. But for you, it's going to be kosher. Why? Because what did you do? You went and removed the boards from your porch. You separated them. You waved them. You put them back down. Oh, you know that you can't use boards for schach. You know I'm not thinking use board. You can't use a house for schach. You know that you can't use a regular house that has boards on it for schach. You know that. You went out of your way to go and remove them and rebuild it, that it's a sukkah and it's not a house. So you did that? No problem. You can use boards for schach because you're not going to think that I could just build a house and use my house, because you yourself showed that you know there's no problem. You know that that it could be a problem and that you want to fix up the problem. And that's what you did. You went out of your way to fix up the problem. So for you, you're going to be allowed to use these boards, which comes out very interesting, that this guy is going to be allowed to have boards for schach, and the guy next door to him is can't go and have boards for his schach. This guy had a porch, and he took off the porch roof and he puts it back down, and he says, now I'm allowed to use these for schach. The other guy is building his porch, and the rabbis go knock on his door and say, sir, if you want to make a sukkah here, you can't use boards. What do you mean? My next door neighbor made a porch with boards, and that's his house, and he just removed it and put it back down, and he used it. I can't make it. Yeah, sorry, you can't use boards because we're afraid, someone's going to think that they could use their porch for a sukkah. But if you built it and then you remove it, then you're actually allowed to use boards. Very interesting, very, very surprising, and that's this is what it says.
So Rabbi, this is only after the fact. In other words, it happened to be there, and after the fact, but you can't go in the first place and decide you're going to
put on boards. Now, I'm not sure. Well, again, what you can't do in the first place is you can't just put boards on without being attached and without building it. That's for sure you can't do. Can you build it, nail them in, and then take them out and put it down? Maybe that you could.
Wow.
If you want to go out of your way and nail it in and put it down, maybe. That I have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch if that would be allowed.
Wow.
But the other guy, but to just drop it down, that you can't do.
Wow.
But the other guy who had it built as a house, he's going to be allowed to, at least according to Beis Hillel's understanding, the Reb Yehuda and Beis Hillel, following that opinion, mefakfek, you could do mefakfek. Now, Reb Meir doesn't hold to this. Beis Shammai doesn't hold to this. They hold that you can't do this. But according to Beis Hillel, you can get away with this. You can be mevatel the tikra. But it is a very surprising thing that the rabbis normally, they're so careful to keep their laws absolute. And here we have a case where you've proven yourself that you're not going to make the mistake. We're going to let you use it. To the extent, I don't know if you remember this, but on the previous page, we had a case where what happens if you put the boards on their side? Even there we said, no, it's not, it's a problem. But here where you took them off and put it back down, that's going to be okay, because you are not going to make such a mistake with building with using a house for your schach. Okay, so that's the conclusion. Let me just finish it off inside. Bitulei tikra kamiflagi, they're arguing about being mevatel the roof, that you're taking a roof, removing it from being a roof and making it into a sukkah. Marsavar batla bitla bahachi. Master says you can be mevatel it. You can do that by being mefakfek, which is Beis Hillel, Reb Yehuda, in the opinion of Beis Hillel. You can be mefakfek. You can do such a thing. Marsavar bahachi loy batla, and the master, which is Reb Meir, says that even Beis Hillel doesn't allow such a thing, and the decree would apply even in such a case. And therefore, the only way to get around this problem, according to Reb Meir, or according to Beis Shammai, would be that, according to Reb Meir, according to everyone, according to Reb Yehuda, in Beis Shammai's view, the only way around this problem is noitel achas mibeintayim. You have to take one in the middle, or every other one, and which we'll see in the Gemara a little more about this a few pages ahead. We'll see how exactly they do it, but ultimately the point is that you're going to have kosher schach in its place, and you're going to be able to dwell inside the sukkah, at least under the kosher schach. Under the non-kosher schach might be problematic, which we'll see, but under the kosher schach, you would be able to sit. Yes, Jeffrey.
So isn't this a little parallel to when we talked about the mikvah and we talked about chatzitza? But if you are not makpid, right, and you put something on that, and it uses a similar word like hanicha, right? If you went in then, so then it's not a chatzitza.
So the difference is that the meaning of chatzitza does have to do with, is this something substantial or not? So you are the one who's going to authorize what's substantial and what's not. Here, we're dealing with rabbinic decree. So it's interesting to find that the rabbis permitted such a thing because they trust you. You know what I mean? Because they feel the reason doesn't apply it to you. But the fact is, it's creating it's not an absolute decree anymore. If they're acknowledging that you don't need it, it's switching things around. The other case of chatzitza, I see a difference there. I see that case is more because you're the one who's deciding, is this actually a chatzitza? Is it significant or is it insignificant? That's really up to you to make that decision. It makes sense that would be up to you. It's surprising that the rabbis let go of their decree in this scenario. Anyway, we're going to conclude here. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
On Sunday.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good Rabbi.
Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos. Bye-bye, everyone.